Lily Harper was 27 years old when I first met her. A young woman with dark eyes full of untold stories. Worn down by the weight of the world yet still brimming with a quiet determination. She had grown up in a modest working-class family in the Midwest. In a small town where dreams often got crushed under the daily grind of survival. From a young age, she had dreamed of becoming a teacher. It was a dream fueled by a passion for knowledge. A deep desire to help others rise above the limitations of their circumstances. But like many others, her dreams seemed too distant to reach. The financial realities of her family's life and the absence of connections made it impossible to pursue the education she needed. Despite these obstacles, Lily finished her studies with a degree in education. She was proud of the accomplishment. But even that was bittersweet. The degree hung on her wall. A reminder of what could have been. She could have become a teacher. Could have shaped young minds. Could have changed lives. But for Lily, life had a different path in store. Instead of teaching, she found herself working as a receptionist at a prestigious 5-star hotel in Chicago. It was far from what she had imagined. But it was a job that paid the bills, just barely. The hotel was grand, with its polished marble floors and towering glass windows, where the city's elite came to stay, their lives woven into the fabric of wealth and luxury. But Lily, standing behind the reception desk, was a silent witness to a world she could never truly be part of. She was invisible, her dreams buried beneath the weight of everyday survival. Her room was small, tucked away in a run-down part of the city. It wasn't much more than a bed, a desk, and a narrow window that barely let in the light of the outside world. The rent consumed nearly all of her salary, leaving little for anything else. The hours at the hotel were long, the expectations high, and the pressure constant. It wasn't just the customers who were demanding, her own sense of worth gnawed at her. How long could she go on like this? Living in a world that seemed so distant from the life she had once dreamed of? Lily lived with the quiet ache of unfulfilled potential. She went through her days with a routine that left little room for hope or excitement. The only things she had left were the small moments of connection with her colleagues, the fleeting smiles, the brief exchanges during the hectic moments. But even those felt like they were slipping through her fingers. As if everything in her life was fleeting, vanishing like mist in the morning sun. Then, one evening, everything changed. It was a night like any other. The hotel was hosting an exclusive event, a gathering of the city's wealthy elite. Lily was doing what she always did, greeting guests, answering questions, making sure everything ran smoothly. But that night, something was different. A moment, small yet profound, would set the course of her life on a path she could never have predicted. An elderly man had arrived, weathered by age and life's harshness. His clothes frayed and worn. He was quiet, sitting by the corner, seemingly unnoticed by the bustling crowd. Lily had seen him earlier, sitting alone, looking out of place in a room filled with the glittering faces of the wealthy. As the night wore on, things began to unravel. The elderly man had made an innocent request. But Richard Langston, a powerful and arrogant businessman, responded with condescension. The elderly man had dared to speak out against him, and that was enough to provoke Langston's wrath. The situation escalated quickly. Langston began to shout, belittle, and humiliate the elderly man in front of everyone. The crowd grew uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. Lily saw it all, the power dynamics, the indifference of the onlookers, the vulnerable man being torn apart by the words of someone far more powerful than him. Something in her snapped. She had always been quiet, had always followed the rules, never daring to step outside her station. But that night, something inside her woke up. She stood tall and walked towards the scene. "This isn't right," she said, her voice firm. "Everyone here deserves respect. No one should be treated this way." Langston's face twisted in anger. He was used to being obeyed, to having people cower before him. But Lily didn't back down. She spoke with a conviction that came from deep within, from a place of empathy and a sense of justice that had long been dormant in her heart. She didn't care if Langston was rich, powerful, or influential. The elderly man deserved respect, and she would not let him be degraded any longer. Langston threatened her with everything he could: her job, her reputation, her future. He even had the hotel manager back him up. But Lily stood her ground. The rest of the guests at the event looked on in stunned silence, unsure of how to react. But in that moment, Lily didn't care about their judgment. She had found her voice. The aftermath was swift and unforgiving. The hotel management immediately suspended her from her duties. Within hours, she was fired. But Lily didn't regret a single moment of it. She knew she had done the right thing. The truth was that she hadn't been defending the elderly man just because he was an old man, or because he was vulnerable. She had defended him because she saw herself in him, forgotten, invisible, discarded by society, yet deserving of respect and dignity. That night, as she packed up her things from the small reception desk, Lily realized something that would change her forever. She wasn't meant to remain invisible. She wasn't meant to let life pass her by. She had a voice, and it was time to use it. As she left the hotel that night, the cold wind biting at her skin, Lily felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. She had lost her job, yes, but in return, she had found herself. Little did she know, the path she was about to walk would lead her into a world she had never imagined, one that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself, and about the world around her. But for the first time in years, Lily was no longer afraid. She had stood up for what was right. And in doing so, she had reclaimed her future. The next morning, Lily woke up to the harsh reality of her decision. She had spent the night replaying the events over and over in her mind. The faces of the guests, Langston's arrogant sneer, and the elderly man's quiet gratitude. It was all so surreal. She had lost her job. Yes. But what did that mean for her future? How would she pay the rent for her tiny apartment? What would her family say? These questions swirled in her mind, clouding her sense of clarity. Yet, amidst the turmoil, something else lingered: an unfamiliar sense of pride, of having stood up for something greater than herself. She didn't have much time to dwell on it. That afternoon, her phone buzzed with a message that would change the course of her life forever. It was from a man named Samuel Lawson, an assistant to a businessman named Charles Winters. She hadn't heard of either of them before, but the message intrigued her. It read, "Mr. Winters would like to meet with you. Please come to his office at 2 p.m. Lily hesitated. Who was this Mr. Winters? She didn't know him. And yet, there was something in the tone of the message that pulled her in. Maybe it was desperation, or perhaps a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, this was a sign of something better. Her intuition pushed her to go, to see what this was all about. When Lily arrived at the building, she was struck by the stark contrast between her own life and the opulence around her. The sleek glass doors, the polished floors, the walls adorned with fine art, everything screamed wealth. She felt out of place, like a small fish in a vast, unfamiliar ocean. But she took a deep breath and walked inside. A young man in a sharp suit greeted her and led her into a spacious office. It was immaculately furnished, with large windows offering a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Behind a massive desk sat Charles Winters, a man in his mid-40s with salt and pepper hair and a look of quiet authority. "Miss Harper," he said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming." Lily shook his hand, still unsure of what was happening. She was confused, anxious, and more than a little out of place. But Mr. Winters had an air of calm about him, and his presence put her somewhat at ease. "Please, have a seat," he gestured to the chair across from him. As she sat down, he studied her for a moment, as though weighing something. "You might be wondering why I asked you here," he began, his voice steady and thoughtful. "It's because of what happened at the hotel last night. I heard about your actions, how you stood up to Mr. Langston on behalf of that elderly man. Lily blinked, her heart racing. How did you hear about that? It didn't take long for word to spread, he said with a small smile. When someone does something brave, people take notice, even when they try to hide it. I admire what you did, Miss Harper. You showed courage and integrity, and those are qualities I respect. Lily wasn't sure where this was going, but something in his tone made her feel like she wasn't just being pitied. She was being seen. For the first time in a long time, someone seemed to understand. Mr. Winters leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but kind. The elderly man you defended, Mr. Gerald Lawson, isn't just any elderly man. He's a former CEO of a major corporation. Someone who has spent decades shaping this city's economy. He's also deeply involved in philanthropic causes. He was in the hotel last night not as a guest, but as part of a meeting on social reform. Lily was stunned. He's not poor. No, Mr. Winters smiled gently. He's someone who's been through the highs and lows of life. And he chooses to help others who have struggled. That's why he wanted to meet you. He saw in you something rare, something that can't be faked. Integrity. Lily's heart was racing. She had never imagined that standing up for what was right could lead to something like this. She had never thought that one act of defiance could alter the course of her life. Mr. Lawson would like to offer you a position. Winters continued. He's leading an initiative focused on social justice and reform. And he believes that your experience, your courage, and your natural empathy could play a pivotal role in it. You would be working closely with him, alongside experts in various fields, to bring about real change. Lily couldn't believe what she was hearing. This was the last thing she expected. One night, she had been a receptionist at a 5-star hotel, invisible to the world. Now, she was being offered the chance to work with someone like Gerald Lawson, a man who could change the course of society itself. I know this is a lot to take in, Mr. Winters said, sensing her shock. But think about it. This could be the chance you've been waiting for, a chance to do something meaningful with your life. Lily sat there in silence, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she could see a glimmer of hope, a chance to be part of something greater than herself. She looked up at Mr. Winters, her voice steady despite the whirlwind inside her. I'll do it, she said, her words filled with a quiet conviction. I'll do it. As she left the office later that afternoon, Lily couldn't help but feel that the world was opening up to her in a way she had never imagined. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to walk now. And this time, she wasn't going to let fear hold her back. Lily walked out of the luxurious building, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She had made the decision she would join Samuel Lawson's initiative and work alongside Gerald Lawson in this mission for social change. But even as she made her way to the subway, a sense of uncertainty lingered. What did this new world truly mean? What did it require of her? The next few days passed by in a blur. Lily spent long hours in her small apartment, trying to process the enormity of what had just happened. She had never considered herself someone with a clear sense of direction in life. She had simply been going through the motions, working long hours at the hotel, scraping by with the bare minimum. But now, with this opportunity before her, she realized she could finally do something meaningful. Her first day at the office felt surreal. When she walked into the building again, she felt like a different person, more confident, more purposeful. The polished floors and high-end decor no longer seemed so intimidating. Now, she had a role to play. She was part of something bigger. Gerald Lawson, the man who had once been a towering figure in the corporate world, welcomed her with the same warmth and sincerity that Mr. Winters had shown. He was kind, but there was an undeniable authority in his presence, an authority earned through decades of hard work, personal sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to justice. He shared with her the scope of their work, tackling issues like homelessness, inequality, and child labor. They would focus on systemic change, advocating for policy reforms and directly engaging with communities to empower the most vulnerable. Lily listened intently as Gerald laid out their plans, her heart both swelling with hope and heavy with the weight of the responsibility. She had always been passionate about fairness, about ensuring that everyone had the same opportunities. But the world of social reform was vastly different from the life she had known. She was no longer a receptionist at a hotel, she was now working alongside experts, thinkers, and activists who had spent their lives studying and fighting for justice. Her role in the project was less defined at first. Gerald suggested that she start by getting to know the grassroots organizations they were supporting, groups working directly with those in need. He wanted her to learn from the ground up, to understand the realities faced by those affected by poverty and systemic injustice. And so, Lily found herself traveling across the city, visiting shelters, meeting with social workers, and speaking to people whose lives had been shaped by inequality. She had grown up with little, but she had never truly understood what it meant to struggle on a daily basis. As she listened to stories of despair and resilience, something inside her began to shift. She wasn't just an observer anymore, she was a part of the solution. There was one visit, in particular, that stayed with her. It was to a small shelter for homeless women, many of whom had been victims of domestic violence. One woman, a mother of two, spoke to Lily about the difficult choices she had to make every day, whether to feed her children or buy medicine for herself, whether to stay in an abusive relationship for the sake of her kids or leave and risk being homeless. Her words pierced through Lily's heart, and she found herself asking, how could anyone stand by and let this happen? The woman's answer was simple yet profound: people like you, who are given a chance. You can make a difference. Don't waste it. Lily left the shelter feeling more determined than ever. She realized the scope of the work ahead was daunting, but the personal connections she was forging, hearing the voices of the forgotten, the marginalized, gave her a deep sense of purpose. This was why she had been chosen. Her empathy, her understanding of struggle, was not a weakness. It was her strength. As the weeks passed, Lily began to find her footing. She became more active in the project, working with the outreach teams, helping to organize awareness campaigns, and eventually starting to design educational programs for those in need. She had no formal background in social work, but her experiences, her life before this, had given her something far more valuable: a deep, raw empathy for those who had been overlooked by society. Lily was no longer just a girl trying to survive in the world. She was becoming someone who could change the world, one small act at a time. And with every new step she took, every person she met, and every lesson she learned, she felt herself moving further away from the scared, uncertain woman who had first walked into Gerald Lawson's office. But there was one truth she had to come to terms with: this was just the beginning. She had made the decision to leave behind her old life. But now, she had to face the challenges that came with it. It would not be easy. There would be setbacks, frustrations, and moments of doubt. But Lily was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. She had found her purpose, and she would follow it wherever it led. Lily's new life was not without its challenges. Despite her growing passion for the cause, there were moments when she questioned whether she was truly cut out for this work. In the early days, the weight of the responsibility felt suffocating. The issues they were addressing were complex, layered with years of systemic injustice. And at times, the road seemed unbearably long. One of the biggest hurdles was gaining the trust of the communities they were working with. Many of the people they sought to help had been let down by institutions for so long that they were deeply skeptical of any outsider, no matter how well-meaning. Lily learned this the hard way during her first community outreach event. She had arrived early, full of energy and hope, ready to meet the families they had partnered with for their new initiative. But when she introduced herself and began to speak, the faces she encountered were not filled with gratitude, but with caution. "Why should we trust you?" one of the women had asked sharply, her arms crossed. "You're just like the others. You come, tell us what we need, and then leave. Where are you when we need help? Where were you before?" Lily had felt the sting of the question, her words faltering for a moment. It was a stark reminder that good intentions, no matter how genuine, were not enough. She had to earn their trust. And that could only happen through action, not just words. Over the following weeks, Lily worked tirelessly to build connections, often visiting the families at their homes, listening to their stories, and offering support in ways that went beyond the project's immediate goals. She had learned that true change didn't come from grand speeches or promises, it came from showing up day after day, being there when people needed it most. It was in these quiet moments, away from the spotlight, that Lily began to see her impact. She had forged relationships with individuals who had been wary of outsiders, offering them not just resources, but respect and understanding. It wasn't easy. There were moments when she doubted herself, when she wondered if she was making any difference at all. But then she would receive a small gesture of gratitude, an invitation to a family dinner, a thank you note, a smile from a woman who had once refused to look her in the eye, and she knew that she was on the right path. But it wasn't just the communities she had to convince. There were also internal challenges. Gerald Lawson, though supportive of Lily's enthusiasm and empathy, was a seasoned professional with high expectations. At times, his direct approach felt like a hard slap after the warmth of the communities she was serving. One day, during a strategy meeting, he pulled her aside. "Lily, you're doing great work, but you need to be more strategic. Empathy alone isn't going to change the system. You need to think bigger." At first, Lily felt a pang of hurt. She had been giving her all, pouring her heart into the work. Wasn't that enough? But then, as the days passed and she thought about his words, she realized that Gerald was right. She had the heart, but she lacked the skills to turn her passion into real change on a larger scale. That was the next step. She needed to think not just about the immediate needs, but also about how to make a sustainable impact. She began taking more active roles in meetings, asking questions, and challenging assumptions. Slowly, she started to understand the intricacies of policy, advocacy, and the economic structures that perpetuated inequality. With the support of Gerald and the team, Lily gained new insights into the power of grassroots movements and how to mobilize people not just to act, but to think differently about the issues at hand. One of the key lessons she learned was the importance of collaboration. The problems they were tackling were too vast for any one person or organization to solve alone. Through her work with other advocacy groups and social enterprises, Lily began to understand the power of collective action. Together, they could influence policy, push for systemic reforms, and create a network of support that could uplift entire communities. But just as Lily began to feel that she was finding her stride, another challenge arose, a personal one. The emotional toll of the work began to weigh heavily on her. The stories of suffering, the constant exposure to injustice, began to take their toll. She found herself lying awake at night, her mind racing with thoughts of all the lives she couldn't help. It was at one of these low points that she received a call from her mother. Lily had been so wrapped up in her work that she hadn't visited home in months. Her mother, sensing the exhaustion in her voice, invited her to come for a weekend visit. Reluctantly, Lily agreed. It was just what she needed, a reminder of the simple joys in life. The weekend was full of laughter, family dinners, and quiet moments by the river. It reminded her that she didn't have to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders alone. She could rest, recharge, and then return to her work with renewed strength. When Lily returned to the city, she felt different, refreshed, focused, and ready to face whatever came next. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but she also knew that she had the resilience to overcome any obstacle. And with each challenge she faced, she would grow stronger, more determined, and more capable of making the difference she had always dreamed of. Lily's path had always been full of obstacles, but nothing had prepared her for the setback that came one rainy afternoon in early spring. She had just wrapped up a meeting with a major donor, one she had worked tirelessly to secure. The funds were crucial for continuing their social justice initiatives, and this donor had the resources to make it happen. Lily had felt a rush of optimism as they shook hands, confident that their work was about to get a significant boost. But as she left the building, she received an email that would shake her to her core. The email was from her team. The government had announced new regulations that would drastically cut funding to grassroots initiatives like the one she had been pouring her heart into. Lily stared at the words on the screen in disbelief. How could this be happening? They had worked so hard to build a foundation of trust. And now everything seemed to be crumbling. 4 days. She walked around in a daze. It was as though the rug had been pulled out from under her. Her mind raced with worry about how they could possibly continue without the resources they had been counting on. She had been so hopeful, so determined. To have it all threatened felt like a cruel twist of fate. In the weeks that followed, the situation only worsened. The cuts were being implemented faster than anyone had anticipated. The team was forced to scale back many of the programs they had put into motion. Staff members were laid off. Projects were postponed. The community outreach programs that had been making such a positive impact were suddenly on hold. And Lily felt the weight of each loss like a blow to her chest. But in the midst of all this, Lily found a source of unexpected strength. One evening, after a particularly disheartening day, she sat alone in her office, staring out the window at the city lights. She was tired, deeply tired. But something inside her refused to give in to despair. She had come too far to back down now. She thought back to her first days working in the hotel, how she had faced seemingly insurmountable challenges, and yet had found a way to keep going. She thought about the people she had met in the communities they served, the ones who had been knocked down time and time again, but who always got back up. She remembered how, even when they had nothing, they had still found a way to smile, to show kindness, to keep hope alive. Lily knew she wasn't alone in this. The struggles she faced were the same struggles that the people she had always fought for were dealing with. They didn't have the luxury of giving up. So neither could she. The next morning, she called an emergency meeting with her team. She looked around the room at the weary faces of the people who had stood by her through it all. They, too, had felt the sting of the setback. But Lily's words were different this time. She wasn't offering platitudes or false hope. Instead, she was offering a challenge, to face the setback head-on and find a new way forward. "We're not giving up," Lily said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We've been through harder things than this. It's time to get creative. It's time to dig deeper, to look for new solutions, and to remind ourselves why we're here in the first place." The meeting was long and intense, but in the end, the team came up with a plan to adjust their approach. They would shift their focus to grassroots fundraising, leveraging the relationships they had built with the communities they served. They would look for small donations, collaborate with local businesses, and push for advocacy on a national scale. It wasn't going to be easy, but they had learned to fight with whatever resources they could muster. That afternoon, Lily took a long walk through the city. She had always found peace in the hustle and bustle, the mix of old and new, the diversity of voices and cultures. It reminded her that every community, no matter how small or struggling, had its own strength. And it was that strength, the collective will to persevere, that would carry them forward. As Lily looked ahead, she knew that the road would continue to be difficult. There would be more setbacks, more challenges, more moments of doubt. But she had learned something profound in the past few months. Setbacks weren't the end of the road, they were simply part of the journey. Each challenge was an opportunity to grow, to become more resilient, more resourceful, and more committed to the cause. And as long as she had the strength to continue, Lily knew she would never stop fighting for the people who needed her most. The story of Lily and her journey through the harsh realities of social justice work had reached its climax. But as every chapter in life, it wasn't just the events that shaped her growth, it was the lessons she took from those moments. The strength she drew from the people around her. And the way she came to understand her place in the larger world. As the final pages turned, each character in her life had their own profound realization. A lesson that would stay with them forever. For Lily, the journey had begun with the idealistic hopes of making a difference. She had entered this field with wide-eyed enthusiasm, believing that a single person could change the world. But as she encountered the difficulties of funding cuts, resistance from powerful forces, and the weight of the world on her shoulders, she realized that change wasn't a straight path. It was messy. It was complicated. But above all, it was never easy. The greatest lesson she had learned through the months of hardship was that resilience wasn't about never falling, it was about always getting back up. And sometimes, it wasn't about grand victories but small, incremental steps toward a larger goal. Lily realized that she had always been stronger than she had given herself credit for. The setbacks, the criticism, the tough times, none of those could break her because her purpose was bigger than any obstacle. She had learned the power of empathy and what it meant to connect with the people she was serving, not just as a professional, but as a fellow human being. It was that empathy, that shared understanding of what it meant to struggle and to fight, that had given her the strength to carry on. And in the end, she knew that it wasn't the result that mattered, it was the effort, the heart, and the relentless pursuit of something meaningful. Mark, the wealthy businessman who had once been a stranger to Lily's world, had undergone a transformation of his own. At the start, he had seen his wealth and influence as the solution to the problems that people like Lily were fighting against. He had believed that his success entitled him to offer solutions, to provide charity, without understanding the deeper issues at play. But when Mark saw Lily's perseverance, her refusal to back down even in the face of overwhelming odds, something in him shifted. He had come to understand that wealth wasn't just a tool for power, it was a responsibility. True power lay in using his resources for the greater good, not just for profit. He realized that compassion, the kind of empathy Lily had shown in every aspect of her work, was more important than financial success. Through his support, he began to see that the real change came from empowering others, not by saving them. Mark had learned that real strength didn't come from control, it came from collaboration. The world didn't need more power, it needed more compassion, more understanding, and more people willing to act not out of duty, but out of a shared commitment to the well-being of others. Sophia, Lily's closest ally and one of the founding members of the non-profit, had also changed. She had always been a passionate advocate for social justice, but she had often felt the weight of her own individual efforts as if it were a burden. She had carried the burden of responsibility for change, believing that the success of their mission depended entirely on her and Lily's abilities to push through the barriers that society put in their way. But as the team came together to face the challenges, Sophia began to see that no one could carry the load alone. She realized that real change didn't happen in isolation. It happened when people came together, when they supported each other, when they recognized their collective power. She learned that her strength was not in being an individual hero, but in being part of a larger movement, a movement where everyone's contributions, big or small, were valued. Together, they were stronger than any one person could be alone. And through that solidarity, they could push forward in ways they had never imagined. James, a former lawyer who had joined the organization after seeing the injustices that Lily was fighting against, had his own moment of clarity. He had come from a world where success was defined by climbing the corporate ladder, following the rules, and never rocking the boat. His initial role in the organization had been to help navigate the legal challenges they faced. But as the political pressure grew and the battles became more intense, James began to question everything he had believed about success and justice. Through his time with Lily and the team, James came to understand that true courage wasn't just in winning cases, it was in challenging the status quo. It was in standing up for what was right, even when it meant going against the system that had worked for him in the past. He realized that to make a real difference, sometimes you had to be willing to risk everything. And it was through that risk, that willingness to be uncomfortable, that true change could happen. In the end, the collective lesson that Lily, Mark, Sophia, James, and the entire team learned was that change didn't come from one person or one grand gesture. It came from the unyielding belief in humanity, in the power of hope, and in the collective strength that rises when individuals come together for a common cause. Through their trials and setbacks, they discovered that each step, no matter how difficult, was a step toward a better world. It was the courage to keep going, to keep believing in a future where justice prevailed, where no one was left behind, that made the journey worthwhile. Lily had started this journey with the belief that she could make a difference. But what she came to realize was that she wasn't alone, and that, together, they had the power to change the world. And so, they continued together, stronger, and more committed than ever to the fight for justice. The fire that had been kindled in each of them would burn brightly for years to come.